Well, today's Fed Day, and I think that today was a more enlightening press conference than the last one. The last one was kind of boring. There wasn't really anything new at it, but this one, I think, while there wasn't a whole lot new, I mean, we got a couple of updates on repo, which we'll get into later. But today, the press asked, well, they weren't aggressive questions. They weren't questions that really got at the meat of a lot of the problems with the Fed. You can't expect that from the financial press, but they were questions that at least should have been asked. These are some questions. These aren't the most pressing questions, but they are some decent ones. And the first question came from, of all people, Steve Leisman. And when I heard, first question, Steve Leisman, I just, I put my my head in my hands and I said, oh, golly, this is going to be a waste of a question. He's going to probably ask Powell, what flavor of ice cream did you have today for dessert, Chairman Powell? And Powell would say, well, usually I have rum raisin, but today I opted for Rocky Road. And it actually wasn't a question like that. Leisman asked a very fair question, and that was, what the hell does substantial further progress mean? You people at the Fed keep saying this. You keep saying, we are monitoring. We're going to hold steady. We're going to keep printing bank reserves as fast as we can and buying up as many assets out of the market as we can until we reach substantial further progress on our goals. And for those of you who don't remember, the Fed's stated goals, they call them their statutory goals. They're not really, there's no statute that really outlines this stuff. They're reading into the law and interpreting it, but this is what the Fed states their goals are. Long-term inflation anchored at 2% and full employment. Now, inflation obviously is well above 2%. So people would say, well, that goal's already been met. I don't really know why inflation is a goal of the Fed. Inflation is a bad thing at any rate, at any positive rate. We want inflation to be negative. We want the cost of living to fall in America, just like it did after the Civil War during the Industrial Revolution in North America. It was a great time of increasing prosperity in this country. But putting that aside, let's just say, okay, well, their inflation goal has been met, obviously. And Powell admitted that. Yeah, inflation's way higher than we wanted. And I'll talk more about inflation in a minute. But as far as their other goal, maximum employment, full employment, this is a concept that's been debated a lot in economics over the years, what exactly the level of full employment is. And Powell has stressed over the last couple of years that in recent times, we have proven that the level of full employment is a lot lower than economists traditionally thought. Now, personally, I don't like the idea of full employment or the natural rate of employment, whatever you want to call it. It's just something that, it would depend on a lot of factors. It depends on how the inflation metric itself is calculated. There's a lot of things that we go into, even theoretically, what does it mean for the population to be fully employed? Like, are we excluding retirees? Are we excluding, who gets put into the labor force is a big matter when it comes to determining what the level of full employment is. But anyway, there's all these other variables. And so Leisman came out right, I think, got at the heart of this and said, well, you keep talking about substantial further progress towards your goals. The inflation goal's been met. Now it's just a matter of the employment goal. What is, your goal for full employment? At what point will you say that your goal of, of maximizing employment will have been achieved? And Powell, I think this was quite a revelation for a lot of people. Powell came right out and said, I will have met my goal when I told you I've met my goal. He refused to put any, to even give any hints as to what he considered to be full employment, what his goals were, where he thought that we would get to a point where he could stop printing so much money. And that's because Powell intends to keep doing what he's doing, running QE infinity forever. There are no plans to ever taper. There are no plans to ever raise interest rates. And so Powell will use this excuse of substantial further progress for as long as he can, and he will, again, refuse to define it. And so I think today, while it wasn't much of a revelation for me, I think that this was a remarkable press conference from the standpoint of the normie who follows the Fed and thinks that the Fed knows what they're doing. Because Powell came out today and flat out said, we have no idea what we're doing. We have no goals in mind. We're just flying by the seat of our pants. And Powell, what he said today is something that I have been trumpeting for a long time, and that is that, in essence, he is targeting asset prices. He might say that, we're trying to maximize unemployment, or, back when inflation was below 2%, he said, well, we got to get inflation up to 2%. Well, now inflation's well above 2%, and Powell admits that. And he says, well, but now we have now I can use unemployment as an excuse. And he refuses to give a goal for where the unemployment rate needs to be for him to have achieved his progress, because then he would have to start reversing this expansionary monetary policy. The goal is clear. Powell is trying to just finagle some kind of excuse, no matter what the underlying economic conditions. He is looking to just create an excuse so that he can continue his expansionary monetary policy, which benefits who? Everyone who's invested on Wall Street. The message that Powell was sending today was buy stocks, buy stocks, buy stocks. That's all you can do. Oh, and additionally, he also sent the message that you should keep buying houses at any price, because not only did today he completely quashed the idea that the tapering of asset purchases, meaning both treasuries, the $80 billion a month in treasuries and $40 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities. He's not going to stop that anytime soon. And also, he's not going to prejudice mortgage-backed securities if one day they do decide to taper asset purchases. Mortgage-backed securities, of course, are securitized mortgages. And when the Fed buys mortgages, they are monetizing debt in the housing market in the same way that they monetize federal government debt by buying treasuries. They are making it easier for the housing market to continue to expand credit and to continue to keep loaning out more and more money and getting people further and further into debt. The Fed is subsidizing that at a rate of $40 billion per month. And some people within the Fed were saying, hey, we've got a housing bubble on our hands. We should, when we start to taper, we should taper mortgage-backed securities first so that we stop inflating this housing bubble. And Powell is saying, no, absolutely not. We're going to taper evenly treasuries and mortgage-backed securities when we eventually taper. Oh, and by the way, we're not tapering anytime soon. So don't even think about it. We have not made substantial further progress, and I refuse to define what substantial further progress looks like, which is translation, we're not tapering. So Powell not only wants you to buy stocks and bonds, he wants you to buy houses at any price, because he's going to make sure that the price continues to go up. So just to reiterate something that I haven't talked about in a while, this current bubble is very different from the bubbles of Fed's past. The Fed has blown many an asset bubble over their history, and certainly they've done a lot over the last 40 years or so. But each and every time, the bubble pops because, the Fed steps in and says, okay, we're going to put on our big boy pants now, and we're going to start raising rates, and we're going to pop this bubble. Alan Greenspan, who was the Fed chairman who started this whole modern era of a highly interventionist Federal Reserve, even more interventionist than the Federal Reserve already was for most of its history. Alan Greenspan decided, hey, I'm going to start blowing asset bubbles because he was a student of the Austrian school. Even though he was an objectivist, he understood Austrian economic theory, and he understood his power to blow asset bubbles. And when they got a little too big, he would pop them, but then he'd come right back in as the hero and blow a whole nother bubble. And so that's why they called him the maestro. And he left the 2008 bubble to Ben Bernanke, and Ben Bernanke tried to follow the Greenspan playbook, and eventually, he popped the bubble, and then he tried his best to reinflate the bubble. And first Bernanke, then Yellen, and now Powell, each generation that you get further removed from Greenspan understands the meaning of these plays in the Greenspan playbook less and less. Greenspan was a smart guy. Whenever Greenspan's on TV, I can turn it on and know that I'm going to get actually pretty decent analysis of whatever's going on with the economy, because Greenspan knows what he's talking about. I think he did terrible things. He was a Machiavellian. He did. I don't agree with his decisions, but he knew what he was doing at least. Powell has no idea what he's doing, and Powell is being more reckless than any modern Fed chair ever, to my knowledge, because he, in the face of the massive bubble he has blown, and was blown by Yellen mostly. Well, I shouldn't say that. They both I think are about equally responsible now. But most of this bubble, or for many years, this bubble was stewarded by Yellen. It grew at a moderate pace. Then it exploded under Powell, and Powell wants to keep pushing prices to the moon, and he will never turn back. And so I don't know when this will end. As far as Powell's concerned, it's not going to end anytime soon. The real theme of Powell's tenure is testing the powers of the Fed. How powerful is the Fed? How long can they keep this charade going? Now, to finish up, I'm sure there's things in the press conference that I missed, but I got the overall theme down. I'm satisfied with what I've said about the conference itself, but something that was included, that the Fed also put out today that wasn't discussed much by Powell, although he did get one question on it and he didn't say much, was the standing repo facility, which is just a fancy way of saying the Fed now is going to conduct repo operations every day from now on. This is going to become a regular thing. Back in September 2019, the Fed conducted emergency repo interventions during the repocalypse. When repo rates spiked up to 10%, the Fed came in, pumped a bunch of money, tried to get repo rates back down. The Fed now is going to have a standing repo facility with a maximum of $500 billion a day, which they could just raise at will at any point, and a rate of 25 basis points, which is 0.25%. What this is meant to do is put a ceiling in the repo market of 25 basis points so that it can never again shoot up to 10%. Now there's a ceiling of 0.25%. If the repo rates in the private repo market get above 0.25%, people would just go to the Fed. Now the problem with this, why this won't work, is that the Fed's repo market facility only, I checked what they accept as collateral. They said it was treasuries, agency debt securities, which are, I believe, just other government institutions, and then agency mortgage-backed securities, which are mortgage-backed securities put together by Fannie, Freddie, and whatever else government agencies. So basically, treasuries and mortgage-backed securities are going to be the main things here. In other words, pristine-ish collateral. Mortgage-backed securities aren't always considered pristine. Treasuries are considered to be better. So, maybe this would provide a bunch of relief, because if we get to a point where there's a huge scarcity of treasuries, maybe there would be enough mortgage-backed securities to provide liquidity to the market. Since it does appear that in the Fed's standing repo facility, they will not be discriminating between treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. So if there's a time when there's some relative illiquidity and the most liquid thing by far is treasuries, people will be able to take illiquid mortgage-backed securities, or relatively illiquid mortgage-backed securities, go into the Fed's standing repo facility and finance them at 25 basis points. And so if you remember what I've been talking about the last couple of weeks with this idea of using treasuries on your balance sheet as a form of repo market insurance in case the, whatever security, let's say some junk bonds yielding 5% or so that you're financing in the repo market, if those become illiquid and you need to cover some gap in financing because you're not able to completely finance the transaction and maintain your position, you don't want to be forced to liquidate, so you lend against some treasuries on your balance sheet and use that money to cover your position in some other illiquid security. This would allow mortgage-backed securities to serve the same purpose interchangeably. In other words, once you hit 25 basis points in the repo market, there will be no advantage to holding treasuries over mortgage-backed securities. And so I'm not sure how much of a difference that would make because I'm not familiar with what kind of volumes we see in the repo market, people pledging treasuries versus mortgage-backed securities. I don't know if right now if there's a huge delta there that now could be narrowed. So I guess I'll stay tuned to Making Sense Eurodollar University, which is a great podcast, because I'm sure in the next episode Jeff and Emil will cover this, and Jeff is the expert in the plumbing of the repo market, so I'll wait for that. But those are my initial thoughts on the standing repo facility. They also introduced one for foreign banks or foreign entities, which only has a maximum cap of like 60 billion, which doesn't sound like nearly enough. Oh, and reverse repo hit almost 1 trillion today. It was 965 billion, I believe, 77 or so counterparties. So I think that just about sums my thoughts up on today's Fed Day news. And I will see you folks back here tomorrow.